Welcome to Stoned Stories with me, Paige. How are you? Whether you need an escape or just a moment to unwind, you're in the right place. Everyone loves a story, and everyone needs a break. So sit back and let me take you on a gemological journey. And while we're at it, let's get stoned. What if I told you one of the most misunderstood gemstones on Earth has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years? A stone many people think they already know. Common, affordable, familiar. And yet,
that simple description barely scratches the surface.
Because garnet is not one gem. It doesn't exist in one world, and it won't be confined to one color. Today, we'll focus on garnet, how it's traveled through history, and how it's been perceived for thousands of years around the world. It's true that garnet is not one gem. Instead, garnet is a family of minerals born under immense heat and pressure, forged in mountain belts, volcanic terrains, and the deep, metamorphic heart of Earth. A gemstone that can appear not only in rich crimson, but also in fiery orange, vivid green, honey gold, rose pink, purple, black, and even color-shifting varieties so rare they seem almost impossible. Garnet is older than empires, older than written language. Crystals of garnet have been found in rocks billions of years old, meaning that this gem was formed long before humans ever named beauty and long before crowns, currency, or kings. Its name most likely comes from the Latin word granatum, meaning pomegranate, because some varieties resemble the deep red seeds of the fruit, and for centuries, that resemblance shaped how people understood it, a symbol of blood, life, vitality, protection, and return. Ancient travelers carried garnet as protective talismans. Warriors wore them into battle. Merchants traded them across deserts and seas. Priests, nobles, and rulers set them into rings, reliquaries, sword hilts, and ceremonial gold. To the Romans, garnet was prestige. To medieval Europe, it was devotion and defense. In parts of Asia and Africa, it was trade wealth and spiritual power. And unlike diamonds, emeralds, or sapphires, stones historically revered for the elite. Garnet moves through every level of society. It adorned emperors, but it also traveled with ordinary people. It was precious enough for royalty, yet accessible enough for merchants, pilgrims, and sailors. That gave garnet something rare in gem history, not just value, but reach. Gemologically, garnet is extraordinary because it is what scientists call a mineral group, not a single species. That means several closely related minerals share the same crystal structure, while swapping chemical ingredients like iron, magnesium, aluminum, calcium, and manganese. Those tiny atomic substitutions, that's a fun one, say that 3 times fast, tiny atomic substitutions create entirely different gems. There is pyrope, glowing like embers.
Almandine, deep, wine red, and durable. Spessartine, blazing orange. Grossular, which can become the brilliant green savorite. Andradite, home of the dazzling green demantoid. Each one is garnet. Each one tells a different geological story.
And throughout history, people often valued garnet, not only for beauty, but for reliability. It is relatively hard, durable, and capable of taking a bright polish. It survives travel. It survives wear. It survives centuries underground. That is why archaeologists keep finding it in Anglo-Saxon treasures, Roman jewelry, Viking graves, Indian trade goods, African beadwork, medieval relics, Victorian brooches. The gem returns again and again. Wherever humans try to preserve meaning in something beautiful, but value changes with time. And there were eras when garnet rivaled more famous stones in desirability. Bohemian garnets flooded European fashion in the 18th and 19th centuries. Russian dematoid garnets became coveted among collectors and aristocrats. Green Savartine in the modern era shocked the gem world by proving garnet could compete visually with emerald itself. So why do many people think of garnet as ordinary? Because history can be selective, and some gems became status symbols through rarity. Garnet became beloved through usefulness, abundance, and range. And strangely, those strengths often caused it to be underestimated. But to gemologists, garnet is a marvel, a crystal archive of pressure, chemistry, tectonics, and time. A gemstone family that spans continents and colors. A mineral that can reveal how mountains formed, while also catching candlelight in a ring. And maybe that is garnet's greatest secret. It was never merely a red stone. It was a companion stone, a traveler's stone, a people's gemstone. And for thousands of years, while diamonds chased crowns, garnet quietly held the world together. And long before modern gemology gave garnet chemical formulas and crystal systems, ancient people had already given it a story of descent, a story of loss, a story of the seasons. And at the center of it was Persephone. In Greek myth, Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was taken into the underworld by Hades. While Demeter searched for her child, grief spread across the earth. Crops failed, fields withered, the world grew barren. A bargain was struck for Persephone's return. But before she could leave, she consumed the seeds of a pomegranate. Dark red seeds, small as jewels. And because she had tasted the fruit of the underworld, she would never fully belong to one world again. For part of each year, Persephone would rise back to the surface. And when she did, spring returned. Fields greened, flowers opened, and life began again. And then each year she descended once more, and winter followed. Whether ancient Greeks ever specifically named garnet in this myth matters less than the symbolism that later generations saw so clearly. A gem the color of pomegranate seeds, born in darkness, carried back into light. A stone of departure and homecoming, of endings and renewal. Perhaps that is why garnet has so often been given as a gift of state travel, reunion, friendship, and enduring loves. Because in every red crystal, people saw the same promise Persephone carried upward from the shadows. What disappears is not always gone. Sometimes it is only waiting for its season to return. Garnet often forms when the earth is changing shape, where continents collide, where rocks are buried, heated, squeezed, and transformed. And for being one of the oldest gemstones on Earth, garnet has spent centuries being underestimated, not hidden, not lost, simply overlooked. A stone many people think they already understand. Dark red, affordable, common, January birthstone, end of story. But garnet has never been the end of any story. It is the beginning of one, because before garnet was set into rings, before it traveled in the pockets of merchants or flashed in candlelight on the hands of kings, it was being written into the earth itself, far below the surface where continents grind against one another, and mountains begin their slow rise. Rock is subjected to forces almost impossible to imagine. Heat builds, pressure mounds, minerals break apart and then reform. An old stone becomes something new. In those places of transformation, garnet is born, a whole lineage of crystals shaped by chemistry and circumstance. And after gaining a storyline in ancient Greece, the idea that garnet spoke for absence, but not always loss, seemed to follow the gemstones through centuries. Travelers carried it for protection on dangerous roads. Sailors wore it in uncertain waters. Warriors mounted it into weapons and armor. Lovers exchanged it as a token of reunion. Priests even placed it in sacred objects meant to endure. Other gems promised status, but the garnet promised safe passage. And so it moved everywhere, into Egyptian adornment, into Roman signet rings, pressed into wax, into the trade routes of India and the Mediterranean, into the colosseum goldwork of Anglo-Saxon England, where thin walls of gold held glowing garnets like captured fire, into Viking Age treasures buried with the dead. Again and again, archaeologists opened graves, vaults, ruins, and ships burials. And there it was, garnet, waiting. That may be one of the most extraordinary things about the stone. Diamonds were often guarded by power. Emeralds belonged to courts. rubies to royalty, but garnet belonged to the people, not only emperors, everyone. It could sit in the crown of a ruler and in the pouch of a merchant. It could decorate a reliquary, or comfort a traveler crossing winter roads. It was precious but reachable, beautiful but practical, durable enough for real life. And because it was common enough to be loved widely, later ages sometimes mistook it for ordinary. That is one of history's favorite mistakes, confusing familiarity with a lack of value. And even science had more to discover. Modern gemology revealed garnet is one of the most versatile gem families on Earth. To scientists, garnet is not only beautiful, it is evidence, a crystal record of the pressures and temperatures that shaped mountains, a clue hidden in metamorphic rock, a witness to continental collision, burial, uplift, and time. In some places, certain garnets even help point explorers toward diamond-bearing ground. The same gem once carried as a talisman now helps decode the planet itself. And somehow that feels right, because garnet has always lived in two worlds, adornment and science, luxury and usefulness, depth and light, ancient myth and modern evidence. Maybe that is why it still speaks so clearly now. We live in an age obsessed with rarity, spectacle, and bright price. We ask what something costs before we ask what it means. Garnet offers another measure. It tells us that beauty can come from pressure, that strength can be born in darkness, that what returns may be more powerful than what never left, and that the things most woven into human life are not always the ones placed highest on the pedestal. So the next time you see a garnet, red as a seed, old as the mountains, bright as a coal in fading light, remember, you are not looking at a common stone. You are looking at a survivor, a traveler, a memory of fire, and a promise that spring has always known the way back. And if garnet has belonged to two worlds, perhaps it should not surprise us that its name eventually settled in a place caught between them. High in the mountains of western Montana sits a town called Garnet. Today it is quiet, weathered buildings, empty streets, windows staring out at the forest. The remains of a place once loud with ambition. But in the 1890s, Garnet was alive with miners, merchants, saloons, boarding houses, wagon traffic, and the restless optimism that follows the promise of gold and gems. Not just any gems, or girl to garnet. In fact, enough garnet had been found in the young mines that the town was renamed after the gemstone, before miners realized that their mines were much more bountiful of gold than the garnet stone. But it was too late. The name stuck. And it was only one of many boom towns born quickly from hunger and hope. Men arrived believing the mountains would change their fortunes. Families followed. Stores opened, glasses set in windows, pianos were hauled into parlors, and halls across rough roads. No piano was ever meant to travel. But imagine the effort for a moment. A polished instrument built for music and candlelight, dragged by wagon into snow country because even in hard places, people still need beauty. And that may be the most human detail of all. For a time, garnet prospered. Then fires came. Harsh winters came. The ore declined. Roads changed, and people left the way people often leave such towns. Gradually at first, then all at once. And what remains now is not just abandonment. It is an atmosphere. Visitors to Garnet Ghost Town have long shared stories difficult to verify and impossible to fully dismiss. Footsteps in empty buildings, shadows passing second-story windows, sudden cold pockets in still air, doors moving without wind, and most famously, the sound of a piano playing where no hands can be found, a melody drifting through vacant rooms, music in a town with no residents. Whether those stories are supernatural, suggestive imagination, shifting timbre, acoustics, or the mind responding to silence, almost misses the point. Ghost stories are rarely about proof. They're about memory. Places that matter to people often refuse to feel empty once the people are gone. Their routine seems to linger, and their emotions cling to walls. Laughter, grief, arguments, longing, unfinished plan. All of it becomes easier to imagine in spaces left behind. And what better name for such a place than Garnet? A stone formed under pressure, a gem associated with return. A crystal once carried by travelers for safe passage, now attached to a town where voices seemingly travel back through time. Even the phantom piano feels symbolic, because music is one of the few things that can exist and vanish in the same instant. It fills a room and disappears, leaving only feeling behind, much like the miners who came there, much like the lives they built, and much like the towns themselves. Perhaps that is why stories of haunting persist there. Not because the dead are trapped, but because the living know how much we lost. And in that Montana silence, the name Garnet gathers yet another meaning. Not just gemstone or history, but echo. A reminder that some places, like stones, continue holding energy long after the fire is gone. And yet garnet has never belonged only to quiet places. Not only to museum cases, wedding rings, myths, and abandoned towns where phantom music drifts through broken windows. It has always belonged to fear, to conflict, to the moments where human beings take beauty and ask it to serve violence. And in the late 19th century, a strange story began circulating through colonial newspapers and military accounts. One so unusual, it sounded half legend, half battlefield rumor. It claimed that in parts of Asia, fighters from hill tribes sometimes used garnet as bullets, believing the stones would strike with greater force than ordinary lead. The story is most often linked to the Huna or Hunza people in the mountainous regions near the Himalayas, and versions of it appeared around the year 1892, when frontier conflicts and imperial reporting turned distant local practices into sensational headlines. According to these accounts, warriors loaded polished garnets, or fragments of garnet-rich stone, into firearms when lead was scarce, or when they believed the gemstone projectiles would cause more terrible wounds than soft metal. To Victorian readers, the idea was irresponsible. A jewel fired from a gun, a gemstone transformed into ammunition. Beauty recast as brutality. But as with many stories carried through colonial-era newspapers, truth and exaggeration became tangled quickly. Some reports were likely misunderstandings of local mineral wealth. Others may have described improvised projectiles made from hard stones, rather than true faceted gems. Some almost certainly leaned into the exoticism that empires often projected onto people they sought to describe. Yet even in embellished, the story survives because it touches something real about garnet itself. Garnet is hard, dense, sharp when fractured. Industrial garnet would later become used worldwide as an abrasive, cutting steel, sandblasting ships, carving through metal with water jet pressure. So the notion that people recognized its destructive potential is not entirely fanciful. The same crystal admired in candlelight can grind through iron. That duality matters, because garnet has always carried two identities at once: adornment and utility, love token and travel talisman, sacred object and industrial tool. Now in this strange 19th century legend, jewel and weapon. And perhaps that says less about garnet than it does about us. Human beings have a long habit of turning whatever they value into instruments of power. Gold became currency, iron became swords, oil became empire, and knowledge has become leverage. Why should gemstones be exempt? Still, there's something haunting in the image, a red crystal launched through smoke and thunder, as if the earth itself had been broken into fragments and fired back at those who claimed to rule it. Whether every detail of the 1892 accounts is factual is less important than what the story reveals. Even at the edge of the modern world, people still believed stones held force beyond chemistry, that minerals carried character, and that certain materials were not merely matter, but destiny. And garnet, with its blood-red color, ancient reputation for protection, and origins in immense pressure, was an easy stone to imagine as powerful. A bullet made of garnet would not simply wound, it would symbolize wrath. Yet time would give the gem another path. Because while rumors spoke of garnet and gunfire, science would soon replace garnet somewhere far more fitting. Because while rumors spoke of garnet and gunfire, science would soon place garnet somewhere far more fitting. In laboratories, in geological maps, in cutting tools, in heirloom jewelry, in engagement rings, and in the hands of collectors who saw not violence but wonder. And once again, garnet returned from one world into another, from rumor and gunfire back to wonder. Because if there's one thing that follows this stone through history, it is that garnet has a talent for appearing where no one expects it, in royal chambers and in battlefields, in mountain graves and in ghost towns, and in one of the strangest turns of all, beneath the streets of New York City. In 1885, as the city pushed deeper into the age of iron, steam, and expansion, crews were tearing into the earth to build the hidden systems modern life depends on but rarely thinks about. Water lines, tunnels, drains, and sewers. Above ground New York was noise. Carriages rattled over Stone Street. Elevated trains thundered overhead, and crowds surged between markets, docks, banks, and tenements. Electric light was beginning to challenge gas flame, and towers of commerce were rising. But below ground, another city was being carved. Dark trenches and mud walls, pickaxes striking old rock, men laboring in foul air so the metropolis above could breathe. And during one of those excavations, a sewer worker reportedly struck something unexpected in the debris and bedrock. Of garnet crystal, vivid and remarkable enough to draw attention in newspapers of the day. In fact, it was a 9.7 stone. That's roughly the size of a small watermelon or a really large cantaloupe. Imagine that moment. You descend expecting brick, clay, waste, and broken stone. You swing steel into darkness, and from the grime comes a crystal born millions of years before the first street was laid. That contrast is what makes the story so powerful. A gemstone associated with crowns and candlelight emerging from a sewer trench. Beauty rising through filth. Geological time interrupting industrial time, and the city above believed itself modern, unstoppable, newly important. But under its foundations waited minerals older than civilization itself, unimpressed by traffic, money, or ambition. And this was no geological impossibility. Much of New York rests upon ancient metamorphic bedrock, rocks shaped under colossal heat and pressure long before Manhattan had a name. Schist, gneiss, and crystalline formations run beneath the streets, remnants of mountain building events older than memory. Garnets naturally occur in some of these rocks, especially metamorphic schists. So the workers had not found treasure placed there by man. He had uncovered treasure placed there by the earth. There is something poetic about that. Cities often imagine they have conquered the ground beneath them. They pave it, tunnel through it, bury pipes in it, call it infrastructure, and move on. But every so often, the ground ain't just back, with fossils and springs, with forgotten foundations, with gemstones, and garnet was a fitting messenger, because no stone in this story has more consistently reminded humanity that pressure creates hidden things of value. The sewer worker likely needed wages, not wonder. He was there to carve channels for runoff and refuge, not to contemplate tectonic history. Yet for one brief instant, his labor connected two worlds, the practical world of survival and the ancient world beneath it. That may be why the story endures. Not because a gem was found underground, but because it was found in a place people considered unclean, unnoticed, and unromantic, a sewer. And garnet, once again, transformed the setting. It suggested that value does not disappear because it lies in the darkness, that beauty is not ruined by the mud surrounding it, that what is buried may still be magnificent. New York kept growing, streets changed, names disappeared from records, the worker himself became a shadow in the story, but the image remains. A man in the dim trench light of 1885, lifting from the earth a red crystal older than the city above him. And in that moment, garnet said what it has always said, look deeper. And after all of that, garnet has never been one thing, not even in science. Because garnet is not a single gemstone at all, but an entire mineral family, one that quietly exists inside other stones, forming microscopic structures and crystals within metamorphic rock that most people will never see. It is part of the hidden architecture of Earth, embedded in places we pass without ever knowing what we're standing on. And yet, when it reveals itself fully, garnet can be breathtaking. Not just red, but alive with light. Cut properly, garnet can show an almost electric brilliance, flashing fire and depth as it catches illumination from different angles. Some varieties are so vivid, so clean, and so well-formed, they rival far more famous gemstones in sparkle alone. And then there's the color range, one of the most surprising truths about garnet. What begins in the public imagination as deep red quickly opens into an entire spectrum. Fiery oranges, honeyed golds, earthy browns, and lush greens that can resemble emerald, purples, and even rare stones that shift color depending on the light. It is as if the earth refused to choose a single expression for it, so we simplified it. We called it January's birthstone, a single label for something that refuses to be simple. But even that modern classification can't contain what garnet has been through in human history. Because long before it sat in jewelry stores displayed or became a symbolic gift for the start of a year, garnet was already traveling through human hands. Archaeologists have found it in Egyptian graves more than 5,000 years old, placed with the dead as something meant to accompany them beyond this life, a stone believed to carry protection into the unknown. The Romans carved it into signet rings, pressing its surface into hot wax to leave an imprint of authority, an identity sealed in stone. A garnet seal was not just decoration, it was power made visible. Across ancient worlds, it was carried by travelers who believed it could protect them on long journeys, guard them from harm, and keep them from getting lost, physically and spiritually. In some traditions, it was also believed to steady the heart and lift the mind, used as a remedy against sadness and emotional heaviness. A small fragment of the earth held close against inner darkness. And when you step back far enough, a pattern begins to emerge. Garnet has always been associated with movement, with passage, and with return. From ancient burial chambers to Roman authority, from medieval talismans to modern birthstone jewelry, from ghost towns to geological laboratories, it keeps appearing at thresholds, between worlds and between states of being, between endings and beginnings. Maybe that is why it never quite faded from human attention, even when it was considered common, even when other gems rose in status above it. Because garnet carries a story we instinctively understand. That what goes underground is not necessarily gone. That pressure does not destroy everything. It sometimes transforms it. And what is buried can still hold light. And so we end where we begin, not with rarity, but with endurance. A gemstone born in fire, carried through myth, worn by empires and buried with the dead, lost beneath cities, and found again and again by people who couldn't quite explain why it still felt meaningful in their hands. Garnet is not just a stone. It is a memory of the earth, a record of pressure and time, and a reminder that even in darkness, something beautiful can be forming, waiting for its moment to return to light. And that's where we'll leave this story, because maybe the real question isn't why garnet has survived so long in human history. It's why we keep needing stones like this at all. A thought to leave you with. What if the things we call ordinary are only ordinary because we've forgotten how to look at them? And the question is, what in your world might already be transforming, quietly, slowly, into something you haven't yet learned how to see? That concludes today's story. Thanks for coming, and hope to see you on next week's episode of Stone Stories. It's sure to be a gem.